What happens to fundraising during recessions and other economic downturns, and what can we do as fundraisers? Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and most importantly, I hope you're staying safe, hope you're staying healthy. We know many of you still need to go to work as you're doing your very important first responder type service through the philanthropic sector. We're very grateful for that. And as you do so, we're confident that you're doing all you can to practice social distancing, and when you need to be present with others, physical distancing, as I'm trying to do today with our guest, Dr. Patrick Rooney, who is with us again on the First Day from the Fundraising School podcast. Patrick is well known for his research nationally and around the world about what happens to fundraising during recessions. And the news isn't good. I mean, we just can't sugarcoat this. We need to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Patrick, what do we know?
Yeah. So, and Bill, this is not to say that the recession has already begun. The coronavirus recession has already begun. But I think when you look at such a huge exogenous shock and so much wealth being sucked out of the stock market so quickly, I think most scholars are going to agree that this month was when, what will be the coronavirus recession will have been date stamped, right? And so it's not our job. We're not authorized to make that proclamation.
Right.
So, but I'm gonna, if I was setting a big wager, that's the wager I would set today.
And if I could just interject quickly, the university, we love definitions. A recession is 3 straight economic quarters of negative territory. So if we use the term recession, that has a very specific meaning.
Right.
But we can just talk about economic downturns,
Absolutely.
even if we don't hit that definition.
Absolutely. So, when we think about, this adversity hitting, so what we have done in Giving USA is we've looked at data from, a long data series. We have 64 years of data that we can say, what's the growth rates and contractions look like in the economic sector, and how does that impact total giving, just to keep it simple. And recognizing that charitable bequests really don't move much with changes in the business cycle. But now, it's probably a good thing that people are not timing their deaths with changes in the business cycle. Psychologically, that's probably a good thing. But what we see empirically is those are pretty isolated. But if you look at just total giving as the best proxy for this, what we see is that for the last 64 years, giving has grown in inflation-adjusted dollars on average about 3.3% per year.
Okay.
So, which is great. But if you parse out the data and you say, all right, what has happened in non-recessionary years, then it's grown by 4.7%.
Wow.
Pretty remarkable difference. That difference is even more remarkable when you take out, if you compare recessions, so 4.7% positive growth, almost 5% in non-recessionary years. In recessionary years, it falls on average of 0.5% per year. So a decline of just over about half a point. Now, if you take out the Great Recession, those other recessionary years are essentially flat.
Okay.
They don't have an impact on giving. So giving doesn't go up, doesn't go down. It's just effectively zero. So it's not good, especially compared to growth years, but it's not, not the negative.
So giving doesn't crater, it just doesn't go up.
Yeah, in most typical recessions.
Yeah.
Now, the exception to that is the Great Recession.
Right.
And what we see in that is a 4.2% decline per year from 2007, 2008, and 2009, or about a 15.5% decline overall during the Great Recession. So wildly different phenomenon, but we see that there were some similarities in terms of the stock market crash and some things like that. So it's not to say that's what's going to happen now at all. It's far too early to forecast that or try to understand that at all. But if we have something that slows the economy in such a way that the Great Recession did, then we might be concerned about that. I think it's important to point out that the Great Recession was caused by endogenous variables. So,
meaning what?
So within the economy, so speculation bubbles, appraisers overappraising house values, loaners overloaning against for secondary loans and first loans and so on.
So internal economic behavior.
Internal economic behavior that has been hopefully fought against, regulated against, and what have you, so that it won't happen again. But This coronavirus recession or downturn, whatever it turns out to be, is more like the OPEC oil embargo. So it's a pure exogenous shock. It happened, something happened outside of our inherent national economy and jolted us. And at that point, that was the worst recession since the Great Depression, the OPEC oil embargo. And that was that was a long-lasting period. It was tough to adjust to. And like the Great Recession, it lasted fairly long. Now, our economy today was in many ways great shape, right? Unemployment was at historic lows. The economy was booming, firing on all cylinders, as they say. And so one hypothesis, and I'll say a hope and a prayer perhaps, is that when we find a way of curtailing and vaccinating and if not curing COVID-19, then hopefully the economy could snap back relatively quickly because there was not this inherent underlying structural problem, right? Things were going well. Eliminate this problem, hopefully they snap back and the economy recovers fairly quickly.
Patrick, we've been focusing primarily on individuals, and of course, as we all know from Giving USA, most charitable giving comes from individual donors. The most recent Giving USA statistics, 68% coming from individual donors. But we also have foundations, and we also have the business sector. Let's focus first on foundations. Right. We had been saying the last few years giving from foundations was robust because they have their money in the stock market. And the stock market had this tremendous gain since 2009. So foundations, by law, had more money they had to give away. What do we learn from recessions and economic downturns that we might be able to apply today?
Yeah, so good news, bad news. So some foundations are entirely invested in the stock market. Some are invested more diversely. Foundations also, some of them pay out based on 5% of last year's market valuation. Some use a 2, 3, 4, 5-year moving average. So one of the things that happens is that that moving average will attenuate the hit that foundation grant making will take. So if they lose half of their market value, just to pick a number, they're going to have fewer assets to draw from. So 5% of half of X is less than X, right? So, but if they're doing a 3 or 4 or 5-year moving average, they're going to be taking 5% of Y last year, which was a high number, 5% of Z 2 years ago, which was a high number. And so that will slow the decline and spread it out over more years. The bad news is it does spread out over more years. But still, this will have kind of a longer lasting effect. Foundations will still be paying out grants. That's, the great news is they're required by law to pay that out. So there's not a judgment as to whether or not they're making gifts. The judgment is how much and where. Now, I will say that 5% is also not a maximum. It is a legal minimum. Foundations are free to pay out more than that.
Right.
And I've done 10,000s of Monte Carlo experiments that shows that they could in fact pay out more than 5% and still not go broke. So if they wanted to lean in during this downturn, however we frame it, they could do so. And some are showing some proclivities to do that. Gates and Zuckerberg initiative are already showing the way of trying to lead in and help with this research.
And then the business sector. Interestingly, the Philanthropy Outlook study produced by our school, which came out right before all this novel coronavirus hit the United States in a big way, was already predicting relatively flat giving from the business sector, even when we thought the economy was robust and strong and continuing to grow. Obviously, you see, I don't need 3 degrees in economics, like my good friend and colleague, Dr. Patrick Rooney, to think business giving is likely going to take a hit as the business sector really struggles during this virus.
Yeah. So, Bill, the 3 biggest predictors of corporate giving, corporate profits. And corporate profits revolve around activity. It's a very transactional game, right? And if people are not going out, now this is going to be a big boom for online shopping, right?
Right.
And curbside deliveries and Uber Eats and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Wish I had created those, right? That said, the second biggest predictor is, besides corporate profits, is GDP. So by definition, recession is a decline in GDP, a sustained decline in GDP. So if that is, that does not augur well for corporate giving. And then the corporate tax rate, well, that came down dramatically. Now, corporations give for a lot of different reasons. And part of it's altruistic, part of it could be in their marketing budget, truthfully. And part of it could be, giving back, paying it forward, however you want to frame that. And part of it is helping build a lot of times helping build a labor supply in their local community or nationally. And so you may see corporations reaching out and trying to do these things.
And even when we hear the news about, the Fed lowering the key lending rate close to zero and $1.5 trillion being sent out to the business sector, or the federal government, the Congress, and the president agreeing on more dollars being put out into the economy. You didn't mention any of those things. Even then, businesses are still dependent on these other areas. And since we don't have baseball right now, you gave us three things, and I'm just going to say strike one, strike two, strike three in the items that you mentioned. So again, we just want to be real, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. As we sum up, what advice do you have for fundraisers based on your previous research on the economy and charitable giving?
Yeah. So I just want to make one more economic
Sure,
comment,
please.
because so you mentioned the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates.
Right.
So a lot of people are adherents to John Maynard Keynes, and others are mortal enemies. But one of the things that Keynes said that I think economists of all stripes would agree with is that the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates at some point is like pushing on a string. Mm-hmm. And I think in this environment where you have people who are losing their livelihoods, the likelihood that cutting interest rates dramatically having a material effect is pretty small, because the only people that will have an impact on is people who still can buy a new house or a new car and still want to in the current environment. And I think that's going to asymptotically approach zero until the dust settles. So that is to put in a plug for fiscal policy. I think the federal government and all branches of government need to stimulate the economy for workers, low-income households, and so on.
Well, quick empirical data point, the day after the Fed cut the rate near zero, the market the next day lost 3,000 points. So,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And and so this happened twice now. They cut the rates twice, and both times the market has plunged the next day.
Right.
Saying this is too little, and now the problem is, with interest rates being near zero, what arrows do they have left in their quiver? Nothing.
So what can we do as fundraisers?
Yeah, sorry, Bill.
No, it's okay.
But I just wanted to, since we're doing a deeper dive in the economy here. So I think, for fundraisers, I think the focus needs to be on regular communication with their constituents, helping where they can, and building their online platforms, communicating with their donors and prospective donors, having those Zoom meetings or Skype calls or whatever they can with their planned gift donors, with their major gift donors, and maybe kind of town hall type meetings with other donors and groups of donors, just like we've seen in the presidential debates, where people can fire in questions. Now, social distancing, let's keep it just strictly online for those things, right? Let's not get a bunch of people in the room with a charity and asking questions. That can be arranged and facilitated by technology. But I think the other thing is being respectful of people's economic circumstances. This is not a time to be pushing hard. It's time to ask. We know tautologically if you don't ask, households generally don't give. But we also want to be respectful that how we ask, when we ask, how firmly we ask needs to be conscious of the current environment.
Start where you are with what you have and who you know, do the best you can. We know when the Great Recession hit, fewer households donated, but a significant number of households still donated, albeit at a lower number. You can take hope in that as you stay in touch with your donors. And of course, we invite you to stay in touch with the Fundraising School. Our website is philanthropy.iupui.edu. You can follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook. We'll continue to have resources. We're putting out free webinars on a weekly basis that are interactive. It gives you a chance to ask questions directly, to share information, to commiserate, worry, and stress a little bit. We want to be there for you as your career-long colleague. And again, a great way to start is our website, philanthropy.iupui.edu. With Dr. Patrick Rooney, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.